Hey, Dog Nation, happy Sunday morning to you. My name's Brandon Adams. This is our Chase for the Championship. We're going to do live reaction here coming up in probably about, 20, 25 minutes from now. The College Football Playoff Top 25 will be announced. The final selections for the College Football Playoff will also be announced there as well. And at that time, the Georgia Bulldogs will learn their fate about being in the College Football Playoff. The expectation is that is where Georgia's going to be. For the most part, folks online seem to think it looks like Alabama as the 1 seed, possibly playing Cincinnati as the 4 seed, setting up Georgia as a 2-3 matchup against the Big Ten champion Michigan. I think conventional wisdom also has it that Alabama will be looking to go to Dallas for, to the extent that the number 1 seed gets its selection there. We'll get a chance to go to Dallas. It's almost kind of an unofficial thing that the number 1 seed gets its sway on and say in that. But the thought is that maybe Bama might go to Dallas for the game against Cincinnati, and that would put Georgia and Michigan potentially in Miami. That's the conventional wisdom that's out there right now. We'll find out how much reality matches up with the conventional wisdom here in a moment. And look, I'm not going to be dumb here and pretend that this conversation about Georgia in the College Football Playoff doesn't come with a certain bittersweet tone, just given the way that Georgia played last night in the SEC Championship. A lot of Georgia fans may be left to wonder, well, how excited can I really be about this today if Georgia does get some good news here in a few minutes, and we're about 8 minutes away from the start of the program on ESPN television. I'll be watching that right over here and kind of talking to you as it all takes place. A lot of folks left to wonder, well, how excited can I really be about that, given the way that Georgia played last night? And listen, I get that. I don't know that anybody wears their emotions on their sleeve with this team more so than I do. I mean, I show up in the studio each and every day. I've always got the Georgia gear on. I live and die with every moment related to that. No one was more devastated than me last night. I sit in the press box. The press box, I always joke about the coastal elites that sit in there, the erudite crew that's in there. And there's no cheering. There's nothing like that. And I do respect the professional environment. I understand those, folks have a job to do, their stories and things like that. But in a game like that, it just became very hard for me to sit still and sit quietly and be in that situation. So for a little while last night, I'd actually kind of sneak out of the press box for a moment and kind of go find some Georgia fans to sit with just for a minute, just so I could just kind of relax and see if that kind of changed the energy for the game. It did not. That did not work. So the point here is I was moving around Mercedes-Benz Stadium last night trying to find a place I could sit to make this game go different, and obviously none of that worked. It was just a bad night for the Georgia Bulldogs all the way around. But consider some context, though, here when it comes to the College Football Playoff, that if Georgia gets some good news here in a few minutes, and I'll explain why later on, I think that Georgia is overwhelmingly like to get that good news, and deservingly so. But if Georgia does get some good news here this afternoon, as we kind of transition, that is still worth celebrating, and it is still worth appreciating what Georgia has accomplished to get there and what Georgia can still accomplish over the course of the rest of the season if it's lucky enough to play in a national semifinal game. And there are only 130 teams that play Division I, FBS level football. And over the course of the College Football Playoff, which dates back to 2014, we have 7 years of this event. That means there are 28 teams that have had a chance of making the College Football Playoff. But over the course of those 7 years and 28 berths available, if I did the math correctly, and I did this pretty quick right before the show began today, am I right to say there have only been 11 schools that have represented the 28 spots for the College Football Playoff over the course of the last 7 years? So of the 130 teams that were eligible for the College Football Playoff, only 119 of those have ever even, actually made, I should say 119 of those have never even sniffed the College Football Playoff. Only 11 have, and to a degree, it's almost like the teams that even have a chance of making the College Football Playoff, the number of those teams not much larger, a list not much longer than the 11 who've actually done that. So if Georgia, which has been in the playoff before back in 2017, if it is in the playoff again here today, then at a certain point you do got to shake off the bad feelings of the loss to Alabama. You got to get rid of all of that, and you got to appreciate the fact that Georgia's put itself in the kind of position with still plenty to play for that most of the rest of the country can only stand and look enviously on. And maybe that lands with you today the right way. Maybe it doesn't, but it is true nonetheless. And I think a lot of folks last night that tuned in for our Dog Nation postgame show presented by the UGA bookstore, I think they were kind of left to wonder, well, why is it that Georgia is such a lock or a shoe-in for the college football playoff? After seeing Georgia lose, something that you had not seen Georgia do for the entirety of the regular season, I think a lot of folks were kind of left to wonder, well, can we really be sure that Georgia will be selected for the college football playoff? Obviously, when it comes to the committee, a group I've told you a million times that I wouldn't trust, and when you leave your fate in the hand of that committee, at least to a degree, you haven't done your job. At least to a degree, you have kind of left someone else to hopefully finish the job for you that you weren't able to finish last night. That's all 100% true. That's clearly the case. But even with this committee, who can do all kinds of weird stuff from time to time, I think the still overwhelming likelihood is that Georgia will be selected today. And I guess the teams that you will hear some argument for besides Georgia, maybe an 11-1 Notre Dame team, maybe an 11-2 now Big 12 champion Baylor. So what I want to do here for a moment is compare the resumes of these three teams. And if you're looking for why it's Georgia and not a Baylor, not a Notre Dame, I think the resume here will kind of give you a little bit of an idea as to why that's the case. Now, first of all, Notre Dame, of course, has made a coaching change, and Gary Barta, the playoff selection committee chairman, said last week that was the kind of thing the committee would be monitoring. I think now that Marcus Freeman has been inserted as head coach, obviously former Irish defensive coordinator, getting that promotion, that probably takes that off the table as kind of a negative evaluation point for Notre Dame, either fairly or not. So that's not really a part of my discussion. I think what the three teams in question have kind of done over the course of the year is probably what matters here more than anything else. I want to show you this on the screen. This is Georgia in comparison to Notre Dame in comparison to Baylor. Now, there are all kinds of numbers that you could use. I just picked three here that I think tell the story pretty well. You see the record: Georgia 12-1, Notre Dame at 11-1, not in a conference, not eligible for that 13th game. Baylor now 11-2. Coming into Saturday's action, if you care about the analytics stuff at all, there's a lot of analytics rankings that are out there. I don't have room on the screen to give you all of them. I just picked the ESPN FBI. The reason why I picked ESPN FBI, because it's free. In other words, it's free to access on the internet. You can go find it very easily. It's a big name brand. Everybody knows what ESPN is. And if I'm not smart enough to figure out how they tabulate those analytics, it's still kind of a factor in this discussion. Georgia coming into Saturday's game, number 1 according to ESPN Football Power Index. Notre Dame was 5th. Baylor all the way down at 18th. Also, when you look at wins against the current top 25, now we're about to get an updated top 25 in a moment. I don't believe any of the teams that Georgia has beaten will fall out of that top 25, but looking at the current top 25, Georgia has 3 wins against teams currently rated in the playoff top 25. Baylor does as well. Notre Dame doesn't have any. So in other words, if you're looking at the comparisons there beyond just the overall records, Notre Dame has an analytic rank that's fairly close to Georgia. Baylor has a top 25 wins total that is close to Georgia, but neither have kind of both those resume points in the same way that UGA does. Now, obviously, Baylor is a conference champion, and the committee and its bylaws gives a little extra credit for teams that win conferences, but in real life, in reality, I think everyone knows, even the committee, that the Big 12 is nowhere near the caliber of the SEC. The SEC runner-up is just a better football team. That's a more impressive conclusion to a season than it is even winning the Big 12. So ultimately, I don't think the fact that Baylor is a conference champion is going to win out for it. I think Georgia ultimately gets the nod there. So that's kind of where that stands there for the moment with our chase for the championship. Georgia with the better record, more total wins than the teams it's compared to, better analytics rank, and at as many wins against top 25 competition, at least based on what the CFP committee did last week. So we are a couple of minutes away from this going on television. In fact, the ESPN show should begin here in the next 60 seconds or so. We'll be following that. It'll probably take 10, 15 minutes of build-up for them to actually announce the actual 4 teams in the college football playoff, and we'll obviously follow that as it all takes place. This is our chase for the championship broadcast. Georgia obviously still on that championship chase, although certainly picking itself up and trying to pick up the pieces after a bad loss to Alabama last night. Big thanks to the sponsors who made this possible the entire time. Our friends from Kroger, Marlowe's Tavern, R.S. Andrews, Georgia Farm Bureau. Thank you so much for allowing us to be on the chase for the championship all December long as Georgia hopefully heads for the college football playoff here in a little bit, and it'll be an absolute punch in the gut if that's not indeed the case. A lot of you also want to talk about what went wrong against Alabama, so while we have a little bit of time here before the playoff show begins, let's talk about that here just a little bit. To me, it comes down to, I guess, three pretty significant issues. Issue number one is, and this is the most important thing, the Georgia defense got completely torched last night. And Bryce Young, the Alabama quarterback, Jamison Williams, the Alabama wide receiver, they were as good as you ever probably thought they could be, as ESPN's now coming on television for its playoff top 25 show here. They were as good as you absolutely could be last night. And I think most of us knew that you'd get a big performance from them there in that spot, but maybe even the actual result even exceeded anything you could have imagined. Bryce Young probably won the Heisman Trophy last night. Jamison Williams showed you that he's the kind of weapon that's really unlike almost anything anybody else that's going to be in the college football playoff kind of bring to the table. It was just a bad night for Georgia defensively, where whatever adjustments were attempted to make just had really no impact whatsoever. Maybe Georgia brought a little more pressure there late in the game, and maybe that started to work a little bit. You can argue maybe they should have done more of that sooner. Maybe they should have. You can also be left to say that, after John Mechie gets hurt and, late in the game, who's to say that those stops were as valuable as what could have happened earlier in the game? I'm not probably smart enough to diagnose exactly what went wrong, but we're all smart enough to look at the result and say, man, the Alabama offense just really fed it to Georgia defensively last night. And to me, there is nothing more important in breaking down this game than pointing out that fact. I think if Georgia's lucky enough to be in the college football playoff here coming up in a couple of minutes, I think having the best defense in the country is still something you want to have. And yes, I do still believe that Georgia has the best defense in the country. But when it comes to playing a game the magnitude of an SEC championship against a national championship caliber team like Alabama, I think the definition of what good defense is probably changes a little bit. It's not holding a team to 13 points. You can do that to the Arkansas, the Kentuckys, the world teams like that. But against the very best teams in the country, it's about getting a couple of key stops when you need to. And yes, for Georgia last night, even a couple of more stops, a couple of more instances of keeping Alabama off the scoreboard would have changed the tone of this game a bit, and Georgia simply wasn't able to do that. Now, the best that I can tell based on my own social media and reaction to our show from last night, while the defensive breakdown may be the number one reason why Georgia lost, the conversation starter that folks seem to be gravitating to more than anything else is what's going on at quarterback. And it is certainly fair to say that when Georgia got into a little bit of a shootout with the high-powered Alabama offense, the Georgia offense could not keep up with that, and quarterback Stetson Bennett is among the reasons why. Bennett made bad decisions last night, and those bad decisions came at a time that almost crippled any chance that Georgia would have to win that game. And yes, I've been honest with you throughout the entirety of the season. Of course it's weird that he's starting and JT Daniels, the start at the beginning of the season, wasn't and isn't, and the explanation for why he's not has been so thin, so slim, so non-existent. Of course that's weird. I've also provided a caveat to that statement to say that just because it's weird doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. But as far as the reasoning for, once again, why Bennett's the guy, Daniels doesn't really seem all that close to playing whatsoever, exactly why that is. Kirby Smart wasn't very forthcoming with that last night, and maybe he won't be very forthcoming with that through the course of the next few weeks there either. It seems like, unless something changes here over the course of the month of December, that they have just decided that Stetson is their guy through thick and through thin, and there's obviously been a lot of good things that have happened for Stetson throughout the season, but in a big game last night against a high-powered team, Georgia couldn't match what Alabama was capable of doing offensively, and obviously, and I would say rightly so, a lot of extra attention gets paid to the quarterback because of that. There's also going to be some discussion about some of the stuff that Kirby Smart did from a decision standpoint last night. End of third quarter, the decision not to go for the field goal down 14, I've got no issue with that whatsoever. I don't think field goals help you very much against Alabama ever. I don't think the field goal in that particular instance changed much about the game. You cut the deficit to 11, you're still talking about essentially the same number of scoring plays if you want to try to win the game. So I don't know that a field goal will help you there in that spot. However, I did think Smart made an awful decision later on in that second half when he was facing a 4th and 10 and was content to go for it on 4th down. And then there was the false start penalty that moved Georgia back 5 yards. And that point in time, the punter was brought on, Jake Camarda to punt. That to me was a bad decision from Kirby Smart. That to me is Smart not being aggressive enough in that particular instance. I think Smart's actually been pretty good on 4th down for the most part the last couple of years, but that was an instance whether it's just kind of waving the white flag of surrender or just not being aggressive enough one way or another. That was just kind of a mistake all the way around there for that. I think it's interesting that you're going to hear a lot of different criticism about the overall offensive game plan on kind of a couple sides here. For some people, they wanted to see more from the passing attack. You can understand why they would. But for others, there's also this thought of, hey, how come Georgia actually didn't try to run the ball a little bit more? Because it certainly seemed like at times that Georgia was also kind of abandoning the run a bit and maybe not doing everything that it could to keep this explosive Alabama offense off the field. I mean, there's just no shortage of ways in which you can kind of break down what went wrong here and kind of how it all went wrong. Kirby Smart was asked last night, and the unspoken context of this question is with the thought that Georgia will be in the college football playoff, and we will find that out in a moment where it is and who they're playing and if indeed it is true. Smart was kind of asked last night, given the way in which you got throttled by Alabama again, does that do something to damage the psyche of your team? And let me let you hear the answer that Smart gave on all that.
Oh, no, it didn't do any damage. No, what it did is reinvigorated our energy. It recenters you, right? I mean, I think one of their greatest thing is when they lost their game against Texas A&M, they were to garner some focus and some attention. I mean, to me, that's an opportunity for a wake-up call, if anything. Unfortunate that it comes in a setting like this. But, I mean, they're a really good football team, okay? And the narrative out there was, well, they just went at Auburn and they really struggled. And some of the sacks they gave up, their tackle didn't even get out of his stance. The crowd noise was a major impact there. Auburn played man most of the down, almost every single play. And they won a lot of their battles that we didn't win tonight. But we knew the narrative coming in, these guys can throw the ball. And they got a really good quarterback. And they gave him an opportunity to make plays. And he made a lot of really good plays along with their wideouts.
So, listen, I think Kirby Smart's been a great steward for this program. I think he's done a great job with this team. I didn't love the Smart press conference last night. I thought some of the answers were a little casual. I think that description of what went wrong against Alabama was really just a little too casual for me. And I told you throughout the week, for those of you that watch or listen to Dog Nation Daily, that I expected a tough, hard-fought game. It was a game that I thought that Georgia would win in a tough, hard-fought fashion. But I wasn't surprised at all that Alabama really brought its A game last night. I expected it to. I thought Georgia would match that intensity, and Georgia just kind of didn't. And, the notion that the SEC championship serves as a wake-up call, I think for some people, boy, it's a little late in the season to be getting a wake-up call here. And I think for some people, there's a justifiable question of, well, how can you expect the next time to be better? If you're lucky enough to even get a next time, how can you expect the next time to be better? It's not simply about needing a wake-up call. It's not simply about needing to, shake off whatever needs to be shaken off and, in kind of wake-up call fashion. I mean, it's about going out there and matching what Alabama does really well, finding a way to score some more points and finding a way to get some key stops. The defense that's been great all season long, can this defense be great against a great offense? And that's a question that's been kind of lingering in the air now for a number of years. And as I said a moment ago, yes, don't overthink this. Of course, you still want to have the best defense in the country. And yes, Georgia, regardless of the result last night, remains the best defense in the country. But I think you saw last night another data point that has been a part of the conversation for quite some time that, boy, it's an entirely different level of football game when a great defense is also playing a great offense. And once again, last night, it did seem like the great offense got the better of the great defense, something that's been happening more frequently. That doesn't guarantee to me the result for the next time these two teams play, if there is a next time here this season. But certainly, it seems like Georgia needs a whole lot more than just a wake-up call if it wants to go out there and play successfully. If it's lucky enough to get an Alabama there, again, before it's all said and done. So it's our Chase the Championship event. We're brought to you by Kroger, Marlowe's Tavern, Georgia Farm Bureau, our friends at R.S. Andrews. The playoff announcement top 25 is going to take place here in just a moment. We'll find out if Georgia does get that second chance, that opportunity at redemption in a national semifinal game. The presumption here is they won't be playing Alabama right away, that Alabama may be earning the right to avoid the rematch with Georgia, getting a chance to probably play the Group of 5 team Cincinnati. Is kind of one of the spoils for being the number one overall seed. I'll take a few of your comments here. I think I should have a little bit of time to do that, probably about 5 minutes or so of time to do that before the announcement's actually made. I do want to drop this in here because it seems like the one silver lining that seems to exist for Georgia after last night, on a night when almost nothing went well, the play of Brock Bowers is certainly an example of that. It's being noticed right now by more than just Georgia media types, Georgia fan types. It's being noticed by a lot more than just that. I'll give you, for instance, on this, Shannon Sharpe, who himself is one of the greatest tight ends of all time and also a very prominent media figure, the guy that's on with Skip Bayless on FS1. This is a guy that's got a pretty big following here. Even he was tweeting about Brock Bowers last night to kind of give you an idea of just how impactful Bowers' night was for UGA. Yes, it was in a losing cause, but Bowers proved himself to be one of the most dominant weapons that Georgia's had. Especially as a pass-catching type guy, and the kind of guy that if you can be in the college football playoff, certainly you expect to use. Can I show you what Shannon Sharpe said on Twitter about this? He says that Georgia tight end's a first-round pick in waiting. That's Georgia's only receiving threat, and Bama can't cover him. Now, unfortunately, everything that Sharpe says there is probably true. There came a point there late last night where it seemed like Georgia was throwing to Bowers almost exclusively, that maybe that was Stetson Bennett kind of locking in too much on one guy. Maybe that was the only guy who was kind of capable of winning those one-on-one battles. I mean, whatever the reason was, it is true that Bowers kind of became the full summation of the Georgia passing attack there for a while, but he certainly played a great football game, and I do think it's great to see the way in which he was noticed by guys like Shannon Sharpe and others in the media last night. So that's kind of the story. Awful night on the field for Georgia against Alabama. Another very disappointing saga, chapter in this saga for the Dogs against the Crimson Tide. Good performance by Brock Bowers. Big questions at quarterback, how this Georgia defense expects to play better when it gets into big games against high-powered offenses. How much does it even matter to have that kind of defense if you can't expect it to show up against the offenses that kind of matter the most there? But even on top of all that, still plenty of justifiable reasons to believe that Georgia will be in the college football playoff when it's announced here in a moment. And yes, in light of all the negativity and all of the anger about, getting humiliated in the SEC championship game, of course, being in the college football playoff is still something to celebrate. Oftentimes in life, many things can be true at once, and that's one of those things that can also be true there as well. So we should be very, very close to hearing about the Dogs' fate. We'll follow that with you here live on the Dog Nation video channels as part of a Chase for the Championship brought to you by Kroger, Marlowe's Tavern, R.S. Andrews, and Georgia Farm Bureau. Let me also get some of your comments now for a couple of minutes while we have time to do that, and then we'll just kind of react to all of this as it unfolds here in a little bit. Kumail H., and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, says Georgia needs a playmaker quarterback and elite wide receiver to win the national championship. I think that's true. Or at least I think that's the easiest way to do it. Let me just say it that way. I'm still not necessarily of the belief that Georgia can't win the national championship here this year. I obviously think that's still a possibility. But obviously, and last night was another example of this, it is certainly made easier when you have a quarterback that plays the way that Bryce Young does. It just is. And when you have a receiver that plays the way that Jamison Williams did last night, where you had moments in this game where Georgia was trying to kind of, at least to my eyes, it seemed like they were trying to kind of, bracket him a little bit. I don't know if it's full-on double team, but they were certainly, kind of shading a safety in that direction to help out with another defensive back, and it still wasn't working. That when you got playmakers like that, that is fairly obviously a pretty easy direct path to victory. And Georgia does need to either find those guys for the future or find some way to better utilize what they have right now. It's pretty clear that there's a level of offensive play that Alabama gave its team last night that Georgia wasn't able to match. Josh Strickland says we have elite wide receivers. Several just can't get the ball. He says that basically Stetson Bennett can't deliver the football to them. Yeah, I mean, Georgia doesn't have a Jamison Williams. It just doesn't. Georgia doesn't have, and listen, Georgia's got, as you said, a lot of good wide receivers, but they don't have, elite's a different kind of word. And we haven't seen anybody, George Pickens been healthy, maybe, but right now George Pickens not fully healthy. And that one of the things that came up last night on the on the broadcast, why didn't Pickens play more? He just came back from a knee injury. So you can't necessarily put him in the category of players fully available to Georgia. But even Pickens, for as good as he is, he doesn't run past people the way that Jamison Williams does. So it's just simply incorrect, factually inaccurate to say that Georgia has wide receivers the caliber of Jamison Williams. They just have not asserted themselves in that regard. Matt Shipley says, if you're a 5-star quarterback, don't I can't really follow what he's saying there, but I guess it's on the subject of JT Daniels not playing, which is obviously a frustration for a lot of folks right now. Foster Moss thinks they're about to snub Cincinnati. Foster, tell me more about why you think that, because I sort of felt like Cincinnati was probably in after they won last night. Do you think Notre Dame gets in over Cincinnati? Is that kind of what you're thinking there? If y'all are hearing something on that, tell me what you're hearing. Thomas T-Bone says, if I had to guess who's the next opponent, my guess is that Georgia plays Michigan. That's what I'm guessing here, and that's what we may find out here in just a moment. Let me get a little bit of Facebook while we're waiting. Chase for the championship presented by Kroger, Marlowe's Tavern, Georgia Farm Bureau, and our friends at RS Andrews. So I'm watching the broadcast right here, talking to you there as well. And Eric Zeldin says that he thinks Cincinnati makes it. So that's kind of my feeling too. I mean, I tried to wake up early this morning. I had to go to church for a little bit, but I tried to wake up early this morning and, kind of get the lay of the land here. And it seems like there's almost unanimous agreement that that's Bama is the 1, Cincy is the 4, Michigan is the 2, Georgia as the 3. It seems like both Georgia and Alabama really wanted to go to Dallas. Alabama will get that. Georgia has to go to Miami, which just has a whole extra list of distractions. There's also the potential of rain and weather and all that kind of stuff. Kibo Weir says, Gunner, if you're watching, run for the hills. So that's obviously a reference to Kibo's belief that the way in which Kirby's handling quarterbacks is going to hurt future recruiting, which, listen, I understand the frustration why people would say that. But to Kibo and others, I would ask you this. So if guys like Gunner aren't running for the hills, and we don't know what Arch Manning's going to do yet, but it seems like Georgia's certainly very deep down the road with Arch Manning. If guys like Gunner and Arch and guys like that are watching what's happening for Georgia quarterback, and that's not making them consider Georgia less, then doesn't that open up your mind at least a little bit to the possibility that maybe the folks who are a little more aware of the situation, they're coming to a different take than some folks who are a little bit more far removed from all of this? I mean, if a Gunner Stockton said, boy, I don't know, man, I'm a highly rated recruit, and the way that Kirby's treating JT makes me not want to come to Georgia, then obviously that would back up some of the frustrations of Georgia fans. But since Gunner's not doing that, and trust me, he's not, does that not cause anybody to reconsider? Well, maybe there's a chance I actually don't know what's truly going on here. I mean, you get what I'm saying? That if you're saying, hey, Gunner, I bet he doesn't even want to come to Georgia. Well, what if he still does? And trust me, he still does. Then isn't there a chance that maybe the way in which the quarterback situation is commonly talked about among fans, that maybe it's not quite as simple as that, or maybe not quite as straightforward as that? I think that's at least worth considering. Clarence Dawson said the offense helps the defense. He says no passing game exposed the secondary, keep defense in the field too long. That's absolutely untrue. The offense didn't help Georgia win last night, but Georgia could have had a better offensive performance than the guy that was still losing. Georgia could not stop Alabama last night. Not when it really needed to, not when it mattered at the very beginning of the game. I'm fine with having the quarterback conversation. I'm fine with having the conversation about the offense needing to play better. But you're not going to blame Stetson Bennett for watching the offense, or I should say, you're not going to blame Stetson Bennett for watching the Georgia defense get lit on fire in the middle of the field. You're just not going to do that. That's just wrong. Marcus Chafin said it wouldn't let him reply. Must have been too spicy for Facebook. What are you saying over here, Marcus? What spicy comment are you giving? Philip Hudson said when the playoffs started, I said if you don't win your conference championship game, you don't make the playoffs anyway. Go Dogs. Yeah, listen, look, Georgia's been left out of some of these playoff discussions before when they probably had a right to. So, the notion that they may be the team that kind of gets the extra nod here this year, I think for a lot of UGA fans, that kind of stuff's a long time coming. Joanne Whidbey says, does anyone know if JT Daniels is healthy enough to suit up and play? There's every reason to believe that Daniels is healthy now, but I thought that Brad Nessler, the guy who called the game for CBS when he was with us on the show on Thursday, I thought he said something kind of interesting. And this, to me, may be the simplest explanation that we're going to get, those of us who care about this. What Nessler said, based on having talked to, obviously, you would assume Georgia coaches privately, Daniels' family, that it kind of came down to, and I'll play some of this audio for you tomorrow on Dog Nation Daily, it came down to being healthy at what Nessler called the right time. That there was a moment in which Georgia made its decision about who it was going to go with, and at that particular time, Daniels either wasn't healthy enough to play or healthy enough to practice or healthy enough to do something, and so they chose to go with Stetson Bennett. And when Kirby Smart, and he said this again last night, of we're going to keep reevaluating and stuff like that, I just don't know how true that really is, because you can't there's only so much rep splitting you can do during practice. At a certain point, you got to decide which guy you're trying to get ready, and the guy that Georgia's decided to try to get ready is Stetson Bennett. And I understand that I would say now the overwhelming majority of Georgia fans don't agree with that, but that is what Georgia's kind of chosen to do right now. And the health of Daniels now may not be a factor in that decision, but the decision to go down this road with Bennett probably was initially spurred on by Daniels' lack of health at the time. Kibo Weird sending out a bat signal to JT Daniels. Maybe he'll respond. Jeremy Huntley says if we get that fumble, it's a totally different game. Yeah, I mean, Young, like that was the thing we said we wanted to see. We wanted to see Georgia get contact on Young and see how he handled it. Well, you got a big hit on him that time. The football came loose. But the ball goes like right back to his hands, and sometimes it just kind of bounces that way. Let me go to dognation.com and let's see what folks are saying over there. Announcement coming up here in a moment. Georgia will find out if it truly is in the college football playoff. Matthews 1 says, if I'm Arch Manning, I'm not considering UGA at all. Kirby has shown time and time again he will not put in the best quarterback. All right, we're good. Top 6 getting ready to come out here now. Ohio State does land at number 6. This just coming out right now. Ohio State is the number 6 team in the college football playoff rankings. We're about to find out the rest of these, barring ESPN not taking 1,000 commercials while they do this. Chase for the Championship presented by Kroger, Marlowe's Tavern, Georgia Farm Bureau, and R.S. Andrews. About to find out if Georgia is truly in the college football playoff and who it will be playing. We'll keep it right here and figure all that out, and we'll react to it live as it happens, and then hopefully, for some of us, a chance to start making some travel plans there too, to get a chance to see Georgia in the college football playoff, perhaps for the second time in the event's history, which dates back to 2014. Notre Dame does not make the playoff. Notre Dame comes in at number 5. The Fighting Irish there at number 5 at 11-1. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish not in the college football playoff. So that leaves Baylor, Cincinnati kind of out there, along with Georgia and the 2 conference champions that almost certainly punched their ticket, Alabama and Michigan. And we'll see if we'll see how these final 4 slots are occupied here. But Notre Dame, Ohio State miss out on the playoff. Baylor still hanging around there, and Georgia, Cincinnati still waiting to hear. Obviously, Alabama expects to be the number 1 seed after winning the SEC last night and knocking off Georgia. So one of the teams that had been discussed for a possible playoff spot, Notre Dame, will not get that. TV radio guy expects Georgia to be at number 3, and that's certainly what most folks are kind of thinking here. And for the first time in college football playoff history, a group of 5 team will be in the college football playoff. Cincinnati, after winning the American Athletic Conference last night, beating Houston to do so, is now in the college football playoff at 13-0. And on the ESPN screen here, they see a lot of folks there from the facility just outside historic Nippert Stadium in Southern Ohio, and they're obviously enjoying that. A little bit of a delay there on the TV feed for them. But the Cincinnati Bearcats are in the college football playoff. Expected, I would say, to play Alabama here. And that is pretty big news. For a long time, I kind of wondered if the committee had any appetite to take a group of 5 team whatsoever. I still don't believe they have much of one, but this was one of those years where there weren't many other viable options. And that may also work to Georgia's benefit here too. Just not a lot of other options. And so that's how Cincinnati gets in. And we'll find out now with 3 spots remaining, does Georgia occupy one of those? It's commonly believed it will be number 3. We will find out if that is indeed the case. We do know that Cincinnati is 4th here now, though. So, folks, continue to watch this as a part of Chase for the Championship. Of course, stay close to dognation.com throughout the day with news on everything else as it breaks, and we'll be following closely. Looks like the Oklahoma Sooners are also close to hiring a head coach that will not be Dan Lanning. That's another interesting piece of news that's out there. But for now, the only news that matters is that Georgia is in the college football playoff for the second time. Just coming down on ESPN from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee and the ESPN broadcast, Georgia is the number 3 team in the country, surviving its playoff status even after a loss to Alabama last night, and earning the right to stay on the chase for the championship. And we'll find out in a moment who its opponent truly is, but it is certainly expected to be the Michigan Wolverines, and what a battle that will be once it becomes official. But for now, Georgia is in the college football playoff. We'll get a chance to move on and play a big football game, play with a championship still at stake here. So a lot of Georgia fans still very disappointed about the SEC championship loss to Alabama. But trust me when I tell you, this is a big deal. As I said before, there have been 7 years of college football playoff. That's only 28 spots available over the course of that time. Those 28 spots have been scarfed up by the same 11 teams over and over and over again. And certainly Georgia gets one of those. And I guess there'll be a little bit of TV drama now about whether Michigan, upon winning the Big Ten, the Big Ten East was a little bit deeper this year than you might would have thought. But at least, a lot of folks maybe want to give it credit for, about whether or not Michigan actually has a better case for a number 1 seed than Alabama does. But I think most people believe, and certainly been the way in which it's been discussed largely through the media and social media here late last night into the morning, that Alabama will get that number 1 nod, if for no other reason than to avoid the, for a national television audience, a little bit of a letdown to see Georgia and Alabama play again right away, given the fact we had just seen that game. So I'm sure there's probably a little bit of a distaste around that. But they're going to drag that out, make a little bit of drama about who gets that number 1 seed. And as we've said before, the conventional wisdom is that the number 1 seed would look to be in Dallas, maybe especially in Alabama's case, because like for Georgia, if you want to get your Google map out or something like that, Georgia to Miami, Georgia to Dallas, really pretty close to the same distance, or at least it's negligible from a distance standpoint. Tuscaloosa, a little farther west, a little closer to Dallas, but also, Dallas is an indoor stadium. Dallas is not the, unless you sort of venture over to Billy Bob's in Fort Worth or something like that, it's not the nightlife destination that Miami is. Free time is a little bit of a part of the college football playoff, the bowl story. It's not just a business trip. And Alabama is in at number 1. So that pretty much does it for the college football playoff. No surprise there. It's working out pretty much the way everyone expected. Bama at 1. It'll take on the Cincinnati Bearcats in the 1-4 matchup. Georgia at 3, and its opponent is set. It is the Big Ten champion, Michigan Wolverines. Been many decades, 1960, am I right about that, since Georgia has played Michigan. But these two teams, these two storied programs, will meet in the college football playoff. And what I expect to be the Orange Bowl, although we'll wait for the official announcement on that. But if I could have told you at the beginning of the season that a 12-1 Georgia would be going to the college football playoff and facing a Michigan Wolverine team, at the time, that would have seemed like really good news. And what would have been true then is still true now, even if it doesn't quite feel emotionally that way here in this particular moment. At a certain point, you got to shake off your emotions. You got to put that aside. And you got to realize this is quite an accomplishment for Georgia and quite a big step towards the potential staying alive here for a national championship. And it is also official, the destination. Indeed, Georgia-Michigan will take place in the Orange Bowl on New Year's Eve. So Georgia has a chance to get a big win against a well-known program, world-renowned program like the Michigan Wolverines, then celebrate a little New Year's Eve action right there in South Beach, and certainly enjoying all of that. And on the other side, in the Cotton Bowl, it is Alabama and Cincinnati, with Georgia, I would say, hopeful for a rematch against the Alabama Crimson Tide. That is the official story here. Georgia is in the college football playoff in Miami, in the Orange Bowl, and there you have that. So we'll get your reaction to all of this, and we'll follow the news throughout the day here across Dog Nation. Matthews 1 says, I'll take Michigan by 6 points. Let's see if you still feel that way in 2 weeks. I mean, and you got to understand something. Like, when I come here and do the show each and every day, it's very important for me not to get as emotionally wrapped up in this as much as all of you do, because literally I do this every day. And, I get the way you feel after a game. Trust me, the last thing I wanted to do last night was come and do this post-game show. How do I feel this morning? I am excited about being in the college football playoff. And maybe Georgia will lose by 6 points to Michigan. Maybe they will. Or maybe they'll beat Michigan and get a chance to play Alabama in the national championship. That won't go well either. But this is the college football playoff. This is the Michigan Wolverines. And if you're not excited about it now, trust me, you will be when the game is played. But let's get a few more comments. Over here on Facebook here for a moment. Jermaine Copeland says, Jermaine's got tinfoil hat on. He says the SEC fixed the outcome last night to get two teams in the playoff. I think they could have gotten two teams in the playoff regardless. Greg Childers says in that rematch, Kirby doesn't need to be the one making the decisions. Look, you're not in the college football playoff. It's not for Kirby Smart. And listen, I'm not going to treat Kirby Smart like he's infallible. I'm not going to treat Kirby Smart like he's some sort of deity, some sort of god. Obviously, he makes errors. Obviously, he makes mistakes. I'm happy to talk about the errors and mistakes that he may have made last night or he may have made this season. But I'm not going to go so far as to trash Kirby Smart when he's the one that's had Georgia in the playoffs now for the second time in 4 years. I mean, let's have a little bit of perspective there on that. Kathy Aquavia Green sounds like she's feeling a little bit better. Jordan Good says, what if Cincinnati beats Alabama? Obviously, that'll be one of those things that's kind of watch for here. Jacob O'Neill would like to see the Bearcats beat Alabama. Quentin Robertson also hoping for the upset there in that regard. Randy Weatherford says a one-loss Georgia is dangerous. Of course that's true. Of course that's true. And some people can't see that now, but they'll see that later. Now, listen. A dangerous Georgia may break your heart again when it's all said and done. None of this stuff's guaranteed. But I said this on the broadcast last night. Like, folks are like, why should the next time be any different than this time? Did you not watch Alabama's last two games? Alabama played awful a game ago, played great last night. This notion that the only history that exists is the last football game you watch, that's what gets you in trouble all the time anyway. So there are a wildly different array of outcomes that can come out from all of this. But how about that? Georgia against Jim Harbaugh and Michigan. I remember so frequently, and by the way, great job by our producer, Michael Carvel, having the Michigan assets here ready to go. You talk about production value. This is really it here on a by the way, poor Michael, I dragged him in here on a Sunday to do the show. He says he wants to be here, but I dragged him in here to do the show. We got graphics and audio and Michigan highlights and everything else. So poor Michael, we're making him work very hard here. We did 2.5 hour post game show last night. But in 2016, you go back to the very early days of Dog Nation. This is like pre-video for Dog Nation Daily. We were podcast only. Jim Harbaugh was a very big topic at the time. We talked a lot about Harbaugh back then because it was satellite camp era. It was Harbaugh like camping out with recruits and all the weird stuff that he was kind of doing. And I think in 2016, if you would ask Georgia fans, hey, what's the future of your program going to look like? I think a lot of Georgia fans would say, oh, well, if you're going to win a national championship, you're going to probably have to go through Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Harbaugh had been a very successful coach with the San Francisco 49ers, had really changed the fortunes of Stanford. Look how terrible Stanford is now. Compare Stanford when Jim Harbaugh was there. Jim Harbaugh was a big-time coach at the time. Back in 2016, when he was first hired at Michigan to coincide with Kirby Smart being hired at Georgia, I think a lot of folks kind of thought that Kirby and Harbaugh were on a little bit of a collision course. And then Harbaugh obviously veered off that course for quite some time, and they haven't really been relevant on the national stage. Well, they beat Ohio State. They had no hangover from that game and easily handled Iowa last night. And now you get that big showdown, and there will be no snow, at least presumably so, in the upcoming Orange Bowl down there. So it's as big as it gets. This is Georgia, Michigan in the Orange Bowl. Say that out loud. I mean, how big does that sound? And if you don't feel that way now, trust me, you'll feel that way pretty soon. Let's go over to YouTube for a moment. Find out what they are saying. David Johnson says I'm his favorite Sunshine Dog. Yeah, listen, look. Going into the week, I didn't think Georgia's going to win by enough points, and everybody was mad at me for being too negative. Georgia lost, but they still made the Orange Bowl. They're still in the college football playoff, and they're playing Michigan. Now people think I'm being too positive. I'm going to get it on both sides. I'm absolutely going to get it on both sides because I'm not going to ride the roller coaster of emotions the way the rest of y'all do. Going into a big game, some of you only want to hear Georgia's going to win in a blowout. You literally don't have the capacity to hear anything other than Georgia's going to win by 50 points. But I have to ignore that then. And then when Georgia loses a game, and invariably everybody's going to lose eventually, but when Georgia loses a game, all anybody wants to hear is Georgia's the worst team in the world. I don't ever want to see Georgia play again. And that's not true either. So I have to kind of block. There's like one of the main parts of my job is blocking out nonsense. Nonsense going into a game when all anybody wants to hear is that Georgia's going to win in a blowout. Nonsense after a game when everybody wants to fire every coach and everything like that. I have to try to present an accurate picture of what emotional stability looks like. And that's just kind of my job. And sometimes it sounds like sunshine to some of you, and sometimes it sounds like doom and gloom to others. But it's the same thing every single time because my emotions don't change. It's other emotions that seem to change. So there you go. Orange Bowl against in Miami against Michigan, and the Dogs are there. A very happy ending to an otherwise awful, awful experience over the course of the last 24 hours. And I am not going to tell you that this should make you forget about what happened against Alabama in the SEC championship. Absolutely, that's not the case. And all the questions that were relevant about the Crimson Tide before this remain relevant now. How do you play better defensively? Is it even possible to play better defensively against that Alabama offense or against another good team? And obviously we'll get into the breakdown of what's going to happen against Michigan here. We'll have a month to get ready to do that. And, the obsession over the quarterback conversation, I, to a degree, understand where that comes from. And those questions don't get any less relevant now either. But there are going to be a lot of folks going to be really happy to see Georgia in the college football playoff, and they should be. There are going to be a lot of people excited about Miami against Michigan, and they should be. And so we're going to try to do it all. We're going to try to, ask the tough questions and have the debate about where things would stand with Georgia on the field. But we're also going to appreciate the fact that the majority of the teams in the SEC don't even have a reasonable expectation of ever getting to the college football playoff. And that is where Georgia is right now. You don't think a lot of these SEC teams would absolutely leap to trade places with where Georgia is right now? Of course they would. Even if the path in which Georgia has traveled to get here is imperfect, it is still the destination that everybody in the sport wants to be in. Ohio State, big brand in the playoff all the time. You think they wouldn't love to be where Georgia is right now? Of course the Buckeyes would. Of course they would. So, as we say, more than one thing can be true at the same time. Life often runs on parallel tracks. And on the one side, Georgia had an awful game last night. On the other side, it is one of the 4 best teams in the country and still alive for the national championship. And that is a very good thing. So we're going to wrap up here on that because there's no point in taking the same comment over and over again 9,000 times in a row. You guys are on the record. Trust me on that. So we'll do more of this on Dog Nation Daily tomorrow. Georgia, Michigan, Orange Bowl. What went wrong against Alabama? Still got to ask those questions too. Stay close to Dog Nation throughout the day. Anything else that comes out, we'll be all over that. Getting ready for Miami on New Year's Eve against the Michigan Wolverines in the college football playoff. This has been Chase for the Championship, presented by Kroger, Marlowe's Tavern, Georgia Farm Bureau, and R.S. Andrews. We'll see you again next time.